We now present For the Record.
Education advocates give their report card on how much funding has gone into schools in the budget the governor just signed. Plus, a look inside Madison's alt-monthly publication, Isthmus, and the role of these types of newspapers in the community. Welcome to For the Record. I'm Will Keneally. Coming up in a few minutes, we will sit down with Universities of Wisconsin President Jay Rothman and Teachers Union President Peggy Wirtz-Olson to get a check-in on education funding. But first, the latest on the investigation into hundreds of missing ballots in Madison. The Wisconsin Elections Commission released a draft version of their investigation this past week, detailing many of the missteps that the City of Madison clerk made with poll workers when they misplaced 193 Madison ballots before they could be counted last November. Now, the report alleges City of Madison poll workers were not properly trained, used not secure transportation methods, and did not alert the State Elections Commission staff of the missing ballots. Now, we spoke with Wisconsin Elections Commission Chair Ann Jacobs, who co-authored the report. She says that there is, quote, probable cause that the Madison clerk who oversees elections in the city took actions, quote, contrary to law.
And a lot of them were simply not following the rules that we have in place to deal with ballots and to handle them in appropriate ways. So that's sort of what largely those conclusions are.
Now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court handed down this week a major separation of powers ruling in a battle between the Democratic governor and the Republican-controlled state legislature. Now, the court sided with the governor, ruling that the legislature does not have the power to block the Evers administration from making administrative rules. Now, these are the nitty-gritty details of state law created by state agencies. Now, this would impact, for example, the levels of groundwater pollutants allowed in Wisconsin, as well as allow state agencies to ban conversion therapy for those seeking social work licenses in Wisconsin. We spoke with a legal expert, Brenda Gadar, about how this will shape the separation of powers here in Wisconsin.
Because the committee was essentially altering bills that have already passed that give this power to administrative agencies, the court held that it was unconstitutional and didn't meet those requirements of democratic accountability.
Now, the decision by the liberal-controlled Hyde Court was widely criticized by conservatives. Assembly Speaker Robin Vos wrote in a statement that, quote, the decision overrules those cases, strips the legislature of that check and balance of powers, and bestows even more power on the executive branch. The absence of oversight from elected representatives grows government and allows unelected bureaucrats to increase red tape behind closed doors. Now, on the other side of the aisle, Governor Tony Evers heralded the decision, saying that it, quote, ensures no small group of lawmakers has the sole power to stymie the work of state government and go unchecked. And on the campaign trail, we have new fundraising numbers for some of the candidates running in next year's key races. Running for state Supreme Court next April, Liberal candidate Chris Taylor. She tells us that she has raised $584,000 in the first 6 weeks of her campaign. Now, that outpaces the previous Liberal candidate, Susan Crawford. Now, in the fall of 2026, we'll see the governor's office on the ballot. Washington County Executive Josh Schoemann, the first Republican to hop in the ring, announced that he has raised $423,000 in the first 2 months of his campaign. And just this week, we learned that another Republican is tossing his hat into the ring to run for governor. Southeastern Wisconsin businessman and former Navy SEAL Bill Berrien announced that he will seek the governor's mansion. In a campaign ad posted to his social media on Wednesday, Berrien aligned himself with President Trump. Now, both he and Josh Schoemann are tentatively looking to challenge incumbent Governor Tony Evers next fall. Evers has not said yet whether he will run for a third term, but said that he could announce a decision in the coming weeks. And we have the candidates set for the final round of interviews to become the next Madison police chief. We have John Patterson, who is the current acting police chief in Madison. Patterson is a 27-year veteran of the department. Also, Stephanie Drescher, a captain. She's been with the Madison Police Department for 16 years and currently leads the department's training. And also Milwaukee Assistant Police Chief Stephen Johnson, who has been with that department since 1997. The Madison Police and Fire Commission will hold final interviews on August 14th. And at UW-Madison, Chancellor Jennifer Mnookin is closing that campus's Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement. Now, this is the same office whose leader was removed in January for financial decisions that included substantial raises in that department and what university officials deemed as excessive spending on travel. Most of the programs and staff members from that office will be moved to other departments within the university. And the Board of Regents for the entire UW system this week approved tuition increases. Now, each campus would raise tuition by 4% plus an optional 1%, which most schools are taking. University leaders cited declining state support and inflationary increases for the need to raise tuition.
And we were extraordinarily mindful as we thought about that tuition increases to ensure that we maintain the status as the most affordable public university system in the Midwest and beyond, because we think that's important.
Now, we will be speaking with the Universities of Wisconsin President Jay Rothman there in a few minutes. This all comes, though, after the state legislature and governor cut a deal on the state budget late into the hours of the night, a little more than a week ago. Now, why the rush to approve the Wisconsin budget before lawmakers in D.C. approved the Trump-led Big Beautiful Bill? Now, meeting that deadline allowed Wisconsin to secure more federal funds that could be steered towards Wisconsin hospitals. Included in that budget passed a week ago, more than $1 billion in funding for K-12 education. Now, that's a major policy piece that the governor, a former educator himself, had campaigned on. Now, what kind of impact will this have on Wisconsin schools? For that, we turn to the president of the State Teachers Union, Peggy Wirtz-Olson, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will.
So now, the budget notably doesn't include general school aid. What are Wisconsin schools missing out on because of that?
Yeah, this budget is insufficient funding, so it does not provide any increases for K-12 education, which is going to leave many of our districts struggling, continuing to fund their programs and services, and it's going to open those floodgates again, Will, on school referendums. That zero increase in state aid for public schools in both years of the budget, I know that districts, as we look at it, 66% of our school districts across the state are going to fall further behind.
No, I do believe we did see some funding for kind of areas of education-related stuff, like special education, for example, both at that high-cost special education level and then just generally. What kind of impact would that have for Wisconsin schools?
Well, I want to point out that voucher schools in Wisconsin for their special education funding are receiving 90% reimbursement. And what we had looked for was fairness within this budget, that our public schools receive the same. What the governor put in was 60% reimbursement for special education. What made it across the finish line is 42% reimbursement for special education in year one and 45% reimbursement in year two. So again, fully funding special education in the state of Wisconsin is tremendously important, especially to every one of those students and parents across the state. And we didn't get there.
Now, as you're mentioning before, some of this cost might shift from the state money to now the burden falling on local taxpayers in terms of the property tax increases. Does that make a meaningful difference to how that impacts classrooms, where that money is coming from?
Well, with no additional dollars, right, going directly into classrooms, as I watch the reactions from not only the MMSD superintendent, but also the superintendent in Green Bay, I see their comments pointing directly to shifting that burden onto local property taxpayers, right? I've already referenced in our conversation today the continued need for our school districts to go to referendum to keep the doors open and the lights on. The state needs to invest in public education in order for every student to have that opportunity to thrive.
Peggy Wirtz-Olson, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
When we come back, we take you to the UW-Madison campus for our sit-down with System President Jay Rothman. And later, we take you behind the scenes with Madison alt-weekly publication, Isthmus. We'll be right back with more For the Record right after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Now, another piece of that budget bill signed by Governor Evers, $256 million for the universities of Wisconsin. Now, that's a far cry from the cuts rumored as a way to get some Republican holdouts on board with the state budget. Now, in addition to that $256 million, $840 million for building projects across system campuses. Now, in Madison, that includes renovations to Science Hall, as well as some dining halls and dorms. But no, not yet will humanities come down. Now, as a trade-off for that, UW professors are expected to increase their teaching load, and the system will have to make it easier to transfer gen ed credits across system campuses. And for more on this, we're joined by Universities of Wisconsin President Jay Rothman. Now, a quick note that we reached out to talk about these budget issues, and we agreed to confine those topics to those topics at hand. And thanks so much for sitting down with us. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Great to be with you today.
So I want to first ask this idea, the $855 million that you requested in the budget, how does that compare to what ended up in that final budget?
What ended up in the final budget was $256 million, and I got to say I'm grateful to Governor Evers for his steadfast support of the universities of Wisconsin and to the bipartisan support we got in the legislature. I think the legislature understood the importance of the investment in the universities of Wisconsin, and we are grateful for that investment in our universities.
And I know during the negotiations there was talks about even having cuts to the universities. How did that compare to, like, what would the universities have lost if those cuts had gone through at all?
You know, what we were hearing, because we weren't directly involved in the negotiations, that was a negotiation between the governor and legislative leaders, but what we were hearing is that $87 million was one cut number that I heard, but I've also heard from others that it could have been up to $150 million in cuts. So you contrast that to the additional money that we've gotten, the additional investment, and we're pleased with that.
Why weren't you involved in the negotiations at all? Is that just a way to kind of, take a step back?
Well, really, this is the governor's budget, and he's dealing with the legislature, so it was not a point for us to be involved in the negotiations. It was the governor's negotiations. It was leadership in the legislature. It was their negotiations, and we were simply, because we are simply part of the overall state budget.
Now, in the educational sense, what grade would you give the state budget here?
Well, the good thing is I'm not an educator by training, so I don't know if I'd give ourselves a grade. But again, I just wanted to express my gratitude to both the governor and the legislative leadership on both sides of the aisle for finding a path forward, finding the compromise to invest more in the universities of Wisconsin and deliver for us the single largest increase in nearly 2 decades.
Now, I know one of the trade-offs is this will mean increasing teaching quotas for the professors in the system. What kind of impact will that have?
You know, I think what it's going to mean is that we have to come up with a policy, and we look forward to working with the legislature and coming up with that policy about teaching working load. I have great admiration for our faculty. They do great work. They educate students to go on and do great things, and we're confident that we can come up with a process that works both for our universities and for the legislature.
Now, the Regents just approved the ability for these campuses to increase tuition. Why is that needed?
Well, if you think about it, you look back at the state budget is about a fifth of our revenue. So in order to keep up with inflation and adjust to costs that we have otherwise, and to be able to make investments in the future so that we can ensure the quality of education that our students deserve and their parents expect, we have to continue to invest. So we had to find the balance between the state support, for which we are grateful, but also that tuition support to ensure that we can deliver that quality. At the same time, and we were extraordinarily mindful as we thought about that tuition increases to ensure that we maintain maintain the status as the most affordable public university system in the Midwest and beyond, because we think that's important. So it's always the balance between affordability and quality, and we worked our best to strike that balance.
I was going to say, maybe to that point, we've heard some concerns from student groups that in the face of other financial aid that might be harder to access, especially through the federal government, that this may make education a little bit less attainable. How would you assuage any of their concerns?
You know, I think we have to look at it with the tuition increase and then the increases in housing and other ancillary services. Our total cost of education for an in-state undergraduate went up 3.8%, or will go up 3.8%. We think that is reasonable in light of where we are trying to manage against inflation and the ability to make new investments on behalf of our students. I think, though, the point that you make, and that's the one that is a bigger concern to me, and I think we need to be focused and advocating for, the president's budget contemplates a 23% decline in funding for Pell Grants. It contemplates elimination of TRIO, which provides support services for students of lower socioeconomic means. It contemplates the elimination of the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. All of these actions are narrowing the funnel of student financial aid, and we think that's problematic because education can change the trajectory of people's lives. It can create social mobility, and we need those people to be going to school. Every single Wisconsinite who has the ability and the passion to attend one of our universities ought to have that opportunity. We do our best through institutional aid, providing tuition support for our students. We want to be able to continue to do that. But what's going on in Washington right now is particularly concerning as it relates to those students. We think those students should have the same opportunities that prior generations of Wisconsinites and, quite frankly, prior generations of people across the United States have had.
When we come back, we take a behind-the-scenes look at Isthmus and the role that alt-weekly publications have in cities like Madison. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Isthmus, the alt-weekly newspaper, has been a Madison staple for decades. After briefly shutting down their print operations during the pandemic and switching to a nonprofit model, the publication is back in print monthly. And this week, the paper hosted members of other alt-weeklies from across the country for an alternative media convention here in Madison. Now, we spoke with Isthmus editor Judy Davidoff at one of their events at the Wisconsin Historical Society for more on the paper's role in a place like Madison. Thanks for sitting down with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I do want to mention we're in the Wisconsin Historical Society at this national conference here, but I want to talk specifically about Isthmus. One of my favorite anecdotes of Isthmus is this old ethics speech that the city attorney would give to new council members saying, don't do anything that you wouldn't want to see printed on the front page of Isthmus. Just kind of talking
Love
about
that.
what a pillar it is to the Madison community. And I'm hoping to get kind of from your perspective, like what Isthmus means to a city like Madison.
Sure. Well, you know, I think Isthmus was hyper-local before people really knew what that term means. Staff lives in Madison. We cover Madison and to some extent, you know, greater Dane County. We are a community connector. We report on news that affects the people who live here. We report on the arts. We have the most comprehensive community calendar in town. People look to us to find out where, you know, they should go, what they should do, what they should eat with our food coverage. So we are, you know, we're of the community and we report on the community.
I know it's been kind of an evolving task, certainly for Isthmus, changing, certainly shutting down during the pandemic for a little bit, shifting from that nonprofit status or for-profit to nonprofit status. What have some of the last couple of years looked like?
Yeah, it's, you know, of course, journalism has been in sort of disarray for, you know, almost 20 years now, but then COVID was an extra special punch. You know, journalists lost their job, outlets went out. Isthmus paused print in March of 2020, and the owners decided a couple of months later they just didn't see a financial way forward. But they very generously supported the transition to a nonprofit. There was an asset transfer agreement. We did apply for nonprofit status, and we got it by March of 2021. And during that same period, we decided that it was now or never to return to print. You know, when we talked to people about Isthmus, you know, by then it hadn't had a print paper for about a year, and to many people, Isthmus means print, you know, holding it in their hands. We're a much smaller outfit now, and so we did what we could, which was to return as a print monthly. And that happened in August of 2021, and that was 17 months after the print pause.
And so you're getting people from across the country facing kind of similar issues, you know, going through kind of similar things. Why is it important to kind of gather this brain trust, so to speak, in a place like Madison and right now?
Right. Well, what this association does, and publishers, is they pick a host city every year, one of their publications. And so they did ask us to host it this year. We had actually, the association had a conference in 2002 as well. But it's very important for people on the business side, people on the edit side to get together and really share experiences. What are they going through? You know, what are your issues? What are your concerns? Revenue, of course, that's top of everyone's list. There are many private papers now that are looking at nonprofit status like us. You know, advertising, has come back for some of us. It is actually an important revenue stream for us. But if you're a nonprofit, you can also look to grant money, philanthropic support. You, of course, can get that anyway. It's just tax deductible if you're a nonprofit. So I think it's all sorts of things. I think it's support, it's learning from your peers. It's really finding some solutions to the problems that are challenging everyone.
When we come back, we bid a farewell to one of our own here at News 3 Now. We'll be right back with more For the Record right after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Looking ahead to next week, we will sit down with MMSD Superintendent Joe Gothard as the Madison School District works under the latest budget funding formula passed out of the state capitol and as voters approved a major referendum for the district last year. Now, another note, a sad note before we head out. We're saying goodbye this week to one of our directors, Kurt Johnson. Now, he's one of those guys, if you remember back to when we interviewed the Madison mayor in the wake of last December's school shooting, Madison was navigating a tragedy, and he's one of those guys where he could figure out how to tell that story through our studio cameras here. Now, he blended creativity and dependability, helped steer all of what you saw out on air from the set here during an incredibly hectic election cycle, and he would always find a creative way to get the people on camera out of a jam. Kurt, we will miss you. Thank you so much for everything. Now, a reminder that you can watch full episodes of the show as well as expanded interviews on our website at channel3000.com. That does it for us this week. I'm Will Keneally. Have a great rest of your weekend.
This has been For the Record.